The air in the auditorium was recycled and cold exactly how I liked it. 50 fresh faces stared back at me, eager, terrified, desperate to prove they belonged at Pacific Summit Medical Center. I adjusted the microphone. I was Dr. Jennifer Vance, Chief of Trauma Surgery, and for the next hour I was their god. My eyes swept the room, cataloging nervousness like vital signs. Then they stopped. Third row center. A woman in a charcoal suit that cost more than a first-year resident makes in 3 months. She was smirking. Jessica. My sister mouthed the word surprise at me, giving a little wave. Her entitlement radiated off her like heat from an infection. She thought this was a reunion. She thought she had bypassed the system because we shared DNA. She thought wrong. I didn't smile back. I didn't falter. I leaned into the mic, my voice steady as a flatline. "Welcome to Pacific Summit," I said, locking eyes with her. "In this hospital, we prioritize survival over convenience. We do not abandon patients because something more fun came up. If you cannot understand the difference between a life-threatening emergency and a social calendar, you should leave now. Because unlike some families, we don't leave people to die just to attend a party." The smirk vanished from Jessica's face. The room went dead silent. Before I tell you how I surgically removed my toxic family from my life, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. The silence in the auditorium was satisfying, but it was nothing compared to the silence of my apartment 6 years ago. That was the day my brain tried to kill me. I wasn't chief of trauma then. I was a second-year resident subsisting on vending machine coffee and adrenaline. I was reviewing a patient's chart when the headache hit. It wasn't an ache. It was a thunderclap, a ruptured berry aneurysm. My medical training didn't comfort me. It terrified me. I knew exactly what was happening. I knew the survival statistics. I knew I was a walking corpse. I managed to call 911. Then, as I lay on the gurney in the ER, watching the ceiling tiles blur, I called my mother. I didn't call to chat. I called because I was 23 years old and I was terrified of dying alone. "Mom," I slurred the words thick in my mouth. "I'm at the hospital. Brain aneurysm. They need to operate. Please. I need you." There was a pause on the line, a pause that cost more than I could ever afford. "Oh, Jennifer," she sighed, the sound of luggage zippers audible in the background. "Now, we're literally boarding the flight in an hour. It's Jessica's graduation trip to the Maldives." "I might die," I whispered. It wasn't a manipulation. It was a clinical probability. "Don't be dramatic," my father's voice chimed in from the background. "It's probably just a migraine from all that studying. Look, we paid $45,000 for this trip. It's non-refundable." Jessica worked hard for her certificate. Her certificate. A 6-month esthetician course. She had almost failed twice. My parents were choosing a $45,000 vacation and a participation trophy over my life. "We'll call you when we land," my mother said. "Good luck with the procedure. Be brave." The line went dead. A nurse, a woman named Chloe, who would later become the only family I claimed, walked over with a clipboard. She looked kind, which almost broke me. "I need your consent forms, honey," she said softly. "And I need an emergency contact, just in case." That was the moment the steel entered my spine. I looked at the blank line on the paper. Emergency contact. It wasn't just a bureaucratic requirement. It was a question. Who will catch you when you fall? I held the pen over the paper. My hand was shaking not from the aneurysm but from the humiliation. If I wrote my parents' names, it would be a lie. They weren't my emergency contact. They were unavailable. They were in the air, sipping champagne in first class, flying toward an underwater hotel while I was being wheeled toward a craniotomy. I realized then that my independence wasn't a personality trait. It wasn't ambition. It was scar tissue. It was a fortress I had built because the people who were supposed to protect me had decided I was too low maintenance to require saving. I was the sturdy one, the one who could handle a brain surgery alone because I handled everything else alone. I didn't cry. I couldn't afford the intracranial pressure. I looked at Chloe. "I don't have one," I said. "Leave it blank." She looked at me, really looked at me, and saw the orphan sitting in front of her. She took the clipboard away. "I'll put myself down," she said. "I'm not going off shift until you wake up." That was the transaction that defined the rest of my life. My parents bought a vacation. I bought the knowledge that I was alone. And as the anesthesia took me under, I made a promise to the girl dying on the table. If I woke up, I would never need them again. I woke up 20 hours later. My head felt like it had been split open with an axe because surgically speaking it had been. I reached for my phone with a hand that felt miles away from my body. I needed to know they were worried. I needed to see 15 missed calls. I saw an Instagram notification instead. Cheers to the graduate underwater champagne toast. The photo showed my mother and father clinking flutes inside a glass-walled restaurant, blue water swirling around them. Jessica was beaming in the center, wearing a tiara. They looked happy, unburdened. For years I asked myself how they could do it. How could parents leave their child in an ICU to go snorkeling? It defied biology. It defied instinct. But as I lay there, counting the staples in my scalp, I diagnosed them. It wasn't simple evil. It was a psychological survival mechanism. To admit I was in danger would require them to admit they were monsters for leaving, and their egos couldn't survive that. So they rewrote reality. They convinced themselves I was exaggerating. They told themselves Jennifer is the strong one, she doesn't need us, and Jessica is the delicate one, she needs this trip. They didn't abandon a dying daughter, they empowered an independent one. They weaponized my competence to justify their negligence. They slept soundly because they had edited the narrative until their cruelty looked like parenting. I locked my phone. I didn't block them. I just stopped being their daughter and started being their observer. 6 years later, the observer was standing in the physician's break room pouring black coffee. The door swung open. Jessica walked in, closing it firmly behind her. Up close, the expensive suit looked a little frayed at the hem. Her eyes were tight, the kind of stress that makeup can't cover. "Did you see their faces?" she laughed, breathless, leaning against the counter. "God, Jen, you really scared the interns. You haven't changed." Dr. Vance, I corrected, not looking up from my cup. "You're in a restricted area." "Oh, stop it. It's me." She waved a hand dismissively. I turned slowly. Embellished. "I told them I managed the trauma coordination unit at Seattle Grace," she said, picking at a loose thread on her sleeve. "And that I have a master's in health admin." "You don't have a master's." "Details," she snapped, her voice pitching up. "I need this job, Jen. Like, really need it. I'm in a hole. $85,000 deep." I stared at her. 85,000. "Credit cards?" I asked. The tone was clinical. "Lifestyle maintenance," she said, defensive now. "Mom and Dad can't bail me out anymore. They leveraged the house to pay off my last car. They said you'd help. They said since you're the big chief now, you could just wave a wand and get me the salary I need." She looked at me, expecting the old dynamic. The one where she makes a mess and I clean it up because I'm the strong one. She didn't see a surgeon. She saw a safety net she hadn't bothered to maintain for 6 years. So she smiled, a brittle, desperate thing. "Are you going to help your baby sister, or what?" I took a sip of my coffee. It was bitter and perfect. "The simulation starts in 10 minutes, I said. "Don't be late." 10 minutes later, we stood in the simulation lab. It is a terrifying room designed to break egos. There are no windows. The air smells like antiseptic and burning electronics. In the center of the room lay a high-fidelity trauma mannequin currently programmed to simulate a pediatric victim of a mass casualty event. "This is the standard pressure test for administrative leads," I said, handing Jessica a clipboard. "Your job isn't to do the surgery. It is to manage the flow. Triage incoming, allocate ORs, manage family notifications. You have 3 minutes before the system overloads." Jessica looked at the mannequin. She looked at the flashing monitors. She looked at the phone. She looked at me, waiting for the wink, the nudge, the skip code that family is supposed to provide. I didn't blink. I pressed the start button. The room erupted. Alarms screamed. The mannequin began to seize. Simulated phone lines rang off the hook. "Bed 4 is crashing," I said, my voice flat. "The neurosurgeon is stuck in traffic. The press is on line 1. What is your call?" Jessica froze. It wasn't a pause. It was a system failure. She looked at the seizing dummy, then at the phone, then at her nails. She stammered, laughing nervously. "Okay, wow, loud. Can we turn the volume down?" "The patient is aspirating," I noted, marking a 0 on my tablet. "You have 30 seconds. I'd call you," she said, brightening. "I'd page the chief." "The chief is in surgery," I countered. "You are the director. Make a call." She didn't. She tried to charm the mannequin. She patted its plastic arm. "It's okay, buddy," she said to the plastic boy who was currently flatlining. "We'll get you some juice in a minute." The long, high-pitched tone of a cardiac arrest filled the room. "Time of death 10:14 a.m., I said. I tapped the screen. Candidate failed to triage. Patient deceased. Liability risk, catastrophic. Jessica let out a huff, smoothing her skirt. "God, Jen, it's a doll. You're so dramatic. I'm a people person, not a mechanic. I hire the people who save the doll. That's the job." "The job," I said, closing the file, "is knowing the difference between a pulse and a PR crisis. You just treated a code blue like a customer service complaint." I didn't fire her then. I didn't scream. I simply walked out of the lab and went straight to human resources. Diane, the HR director, looked up as I entered. "How was the assessment?" "It was an autopsy," I said. "Pull her file. I want to verify the master's degree." Diane typed for a moment, then frowned. "It's from an online university. The transcript looks pixelated." "Call the registrar," I ordered. It took 3 minutes. There was no record of a Jessica Vance. The degree was a Canva template. The trauma coordination experience was a receptionist gig at a med spa. She hadn't just embellished, she had defrauded a federal institution. "Draft the rejection letter," I told Diane. "Mark her as do not hire. Flag the file for credential fraud." Diane looked pale. "She's your sister, Dr. Vance. Do you want to break the news?" "No," I said. "This isn't a family dispute. It's a liability issue. Mail it." As I walked back to my office, my pocket buzzed. It wasn't a notification. It was a bombardment. "Mom, why is Jessica crying in the bathroom? Fix this. Dad, we are coming down there. Do not make us cause a scene." I looked at the messages. They thought this was a negotiation. They didn't realize the operation was already over. 20 minutes later, my office door didn't open. It was breached. "You cannot be in here," the security guard at the desk shouted, but he was already too late. Stephanie and Jeffrey Vance barreled into my office like a natural disaster. My mother was clutching a crying Jessica by the elbow, dragging her forward as if she were a wounded soldier. My father slammed the door shut behind them, blocking the guard. "This ends now," my father roared, his face mottled red. "You vindictive, petty little girl." I didn't stand up. I didn't raise my voice. I leaned back in my chair, steepling my fingers. The contrast between my calm and their chaos was intentional. "You are trespassing," I said. "You have 30 seconds to leave before I press charges." "We are your parents," my mother screamed, tears streaming down her face, the same weaponized tears she had used for 20 years. "How can you be so cruel? Jessica is your sister. She is drowning in debt, and you are sitting here in your ivory tower destroying her future because of a grudge over a little surgery from 6 years ago." "A little surgery," I repeated. The words tasted like ash. "You were fine," she insisted. "You're fine now. We would have stayed if we knew it was serious. But you told us to go. You wanted us to have fun." They were gaslighting me, rewriting history in real time. They genuinely believed their own lies because the alternative, admitting they abandoned me, was too ugly to face. "I begged you to stay," I said softly. "I told you I was terrified." "Liar," Jessica shrieked, wiping her eyes. She pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling as she scrolled. "We have proof. You sent us a text. You told us to go." My father snatched the phone from her and thrust it toward me. "Look at this. Read it and tell me we're the villains." I looked at the screen. It was a screenshot of a text message dated 6 years ago. The sender was Jennifer. "I'm totally fine," the doctor said. "It's minor. Go have fun in the Maldives. Love you." The timestamp was 2:15 p.m. I stared at it. For a second I doubted my own memory. Had the pain medication made me hallucinatory? Had I sent it in a fog of compliance? Then the door opened again. Chloe walked in. She wasn't wearing scrubs today. She was wearing her administrative blazer. In her hands, she held a thick binder, labeled Confidential Medical Records, Vance J. "Security is on the way," she said, her voice like iron. "But before they get here, I think you should see this." My parents turned on her. "Who are you?" my father demanded. "I'm the person who actually stayed," Chloe said. She walked past them and placed the binder on my desk. She opened it to a specific page, the anesthesia log from my surgery. She pointed to a timestamp. Induction of anesthesia, 1:45 p.m., she read aloud. Patient, unconscious. She looked at my parents. Jennifer was in a medically induced coma at 1:45 p.m. Her skull was open at 2:15 p.m. She turned to the phone in my father's hand. So tell me, how did a woman with her brain exposed send you a text message telling you to have a nice vacation? The silence that followed Chloe's words was heavy enough to crush bone. My father stared at the medical log, then at the phone in his hand. He looked like a man trying to read a map in a language he didn't speak. There must be a mistake, my mother stammered, her voice thin and high. The clocks. Hospital clocks are always wrong. The anesthesia record is legally binding, Chloe said, her voice devoid of mercy. It is synchronized to the second. At 2:15 p.m., Jennifer was intubated. She was incapable of unlocking a phone, let alone typing a love note. I looked at the text message again. The emojis, the exclamation points. It was the voice of a compliant, happy daughter, the daughter they wanted me to be. Who sent it? I asked. My voice was barely a whisper, but in the dead silence of the office it sounded like a gunshot. Who took my phone out of my bag while I was being prepped for surgery and sent that text? My father looked at my mother. My mother looked at Jessica. Jessica shrank back against the wall, her face crumbling. Mom said we couldn't go, she wailed the confession, spilling out like bile. She said if you were actually sick, we'd have to cancel the trip. And I couldn't. I couldn't miss the Maldives, Jen. It was my graduation, so I helped them feel better. I sent the text so they wouldn't worry. The air left the room. It wasn't just abandonment, it was a conspiracy. My sister had impersonated me to absolve my parents of guilt, and my parents had willfully believed a lie, because the truth was too inconvenient for their vacation schedule. They hadn't just left me to die. They had framed me for their own negligence. My father dropped the phone on the desk. It clattered loudly. He looked at me, his eyes pleading for a misunderstood context that didn't exist. Abby, we didn't know she sent it. We thought you were fine. We thought you gave us your blessing. You thought a brain aneurysm was minor because you wanted to, I said. You let a 20-year-old aesthetician triage a neurosurgical emergency because you wanted to go to the beach. I stood up. The movement was slow, deliberate. I didn't feel angry anymore. Anger implies you care about the outcome. I felt nothing but the cold clarity of a surgeon holding a scalpel. I pressed the intercom button on my desk. Security to the chief's office. Immediate removal. Jennifer, please, my mother sobbed, reaching for my hand. I pulled back as if she were contagious. We can fix this. We're family. We made a mistake. A mistake is a typo, I said. This is fraud. This is identity theft. I opened the top drawer of my desk. I pulled out a stack of papers I had prepared earlier that morning, hoping I wouldn't need them, but knowing clinically that I would. I slid them across the desk. These are formal trespass notices, I said. You are hereby banned from Pacific Summit Medical Center properties. If you step foot on this campus again for an interview, for an emergency, for a coffee, you will be arrested. You can't ban your parents, my father sputtered, his face turning purple. I'm not banning parents, I corrected. I am banning 3 individuals who pose a security risk to my staff and a liability to this hospital. You forged communications. You lied on employment applications. You harassed the chief of surgery. The office door opened. 4 security officers filled the frame. They weren't the friendly lobby greeters. They were the ones we called for violent psych holds. Escort them out, I ordered, pointing to the door. Jessica screamed as a guard took her arm. You can't do this. I have debt. I have nowhere to go. You have a certificate, I said, turning my back to them to look out the window. Go use it. I listened to the sounds of them being dragged out, the scuffling of shoes, the sobbing, the shouting that faded down the hallway until the heavy fire doors clicked shut, sealing the sterile environment once again. I didn't watch them leave. I was already checking my schedule for the afternoon rounds. The silence returned to my office, but this time it didn't feel heavy. It felt sterile, clean, like an operating room after a successful procedure. I sat back in my chair and looked at the paperwork scattered across my desk. The trespass notices were gone, filed with security, but the budget authorization for the Director of Patient Experience position was still there. It was a line item worth $110,000 a year. That was the salary my parents had hoped would bail them out of debt. That was the money Jessica had felt entitled to, simply for existing. I picked up the file. I could have just shredded it. I could have closed the requisition and saved the hospital money. But that would have just been an ending. I needed a beginning. I thought about the justice of the sower. True justice isn't just about cutting out the rot, it's about what you plant in the empty space. I picked up the phone and dialed Human Resources. Diane, I said. I'm withdrawing the requisition for the director position. Understood, Dr. Vance, Diane replied, sounding relieved. I'll close the file. No, I stopped her. Don't close the budget line, reallocate it. I want to create a new fund, the Trauma Nursing Advanced Education Grant. It will cover tuition for nurses seeking to become nurse practitioners or surgical specialists. There was a pause on the line. That's a lot of funding, Dr. Vance. Nurses run this hospital, I said, looking through the glass wall at the nurses' station where Chloe was currently calming a terrified teenager. They are the ones who stay when the families leave. They are the ones who hold the hands. I want that money to go to them, starting with Chloe. I'll draft the paperwork immediately, Diane said. I hung up. It was the most satisfying transaction of my life. I had taken the resources intended for my toxic biological family and invested them in my chosen family. I hadn't just stopped the bleeding. I had started a transfusion. That night, I stood on the helipad of the hospital roof. The wind was biting, whipping my lab coat around my legs. Below me, Seattle was a grid of amber and white lights, a living, breathing organism. I reached up and touched the spot behind my ear, where the hair covered the long, thin scar from my craniotomy. For 6 years, that scar had felt like a brand. It was a reminder of the day I was discarded. It was the physical evidence that I wasn't worth staying for. But tonight, under the cold stars, it felt different. It felt like armor. I had spent so long trying to prove I was strong enough to survive without them. I realized now that I hadn't just survived. I had surpassed them. I was the chief of surgery. I saved lives every day. And today, I had saved my own. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the freezing air. The headache was gone. The pressure was gone. The silence wasn't lonely anymore. It was peaceful. Sometimes you have to amputate the parts of your life that are killing you to save the rest. If you've ever had to make that hard cut, share your story in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe.